The rancher married his rival's daughter to end 15 years of war, and she saved his life. For 15 long years, the valley had been trapped in a cycle of anger, fear, and violence. On one side stood the rancher, a man whose life had been shaped by hard work and pride. He knew every inch of the northern hills, from the flowing streams to the thick groves where the cattle often grazed. His hands were calloused, his face lined with the sun and wind, and his eyes held a sharpness that had saved him from many dangers. But behind that strong exterior was a man burdened by loss, a man whose heart carried the weight of friends lost, cattle stolen, and family threatened. On the other side of the valley, his rivals had held the southern plains for generations. They were fierce and proud, a family who had never backed down from a challenge. They knew how to protect their land, their cattle, and their honor. And over the years, every small disagreement had escalated into fights, sometimes with devastating consequences. What had begun as arguments over water rights, grazing boundaries, and stray cattle soon grew into a war that neither side could stop. The valley, which could have been peaceful and prosperous, had instead become a place where neighbors watched from a distance, afraid to step between two families whose anger had grown stronger with each passing year. The rancher had seen too much of the feud's cost. His younger brother had once tried to sneak into the rival's land to check on a straying herd and had been badly beaten. A close friend had been caught in a crossfire during a cattle dispute, leaving scars that would never fade. Even the rancher himself had been ambushed more than once. Each attack left him more determined, but also more aware that the fight was taking away not just lives, but the chance for any normal life. Still, the pride of the land, of his family, and of the work they had built kept him moving forward. Retreat was not an option, surrender was not in his nature. The rival family's daughter had grown up amid this tension. From her earliest memories, she had known the world as a place where distrust and caution were necessities. She remembered hearing the shouts across the valley, the sound of horses galloping at night, and the rumble of men arguing over every inch of territory. Her childhood was marked by lessons in resilience. Her father taught her how to ride fast across rough terrain, how to defend herself, and how to read the intentions of strangers. Her mother warned her of the dangers that came from unchecked pride and hatred. The daughter learned early that survival meant being smart, careful, and unyielding, but she also learned that courage and compassion could coexist with strength. Despite the hostility, life had to continue. Both families worked tirelessly to maintain their ranches, tend to the animals, and protect what was theirs. The valley was beautiful, filled with rolling hills, clear streams, and forests that whispered in the wind. It was a land that could provide everything a family might need if only peace could be found. Yet the beauty of the valley was shadowed by fear. Every day, both families watched the horizon, expecting the other to strike. The children learned to hide when strangers approached. Even simple activities, like moving cattle from one pasture to another, were planned with caution. One wrong step could trigger another round of violence. The rancher had moments of quiet reflection, times when he wondered if the feud would ever end. Sitting on the porch of his small farmhouse, he would look across the valley toward the southern plains and think about how different life could be. He imagined a morning without tension, a day when the sound of hooves did not signal danger, when neighbors could speak without suspicion, and when families could meet without fear. But each thought was shadowed by the memories of what had happened, and the pain of losses too many to count. The daughter, too, had dreams beyond the feud. She longed for freedom, for a life that was not defined by conflict. She wished she could walk in the valley without fear, ride her horse across the plains without constantly scanning for threats, and speak to people without thinking twice. Her heart often ached for the beauty that lay just beyond her reach, the chance to live without anger guiding every decision. But she also carried a sense of duty. She knew that her family's honor and safety depended on her understanding the rules of this harsh, divided world. She learned to be careful, to observe, and to choose her moments wisely. Yet the feud had shaped her in ways she could not ignore. She had seen men fight over the smallest things and realized that fear and anger could destroy even the strongest people. She had seen friends and family suffer because pride would not allow compromise. And she had learned that courage was not just about fighting. It was about knowing when to act, when to hold back, and when to step forward to protect what mattered most. This knowledge gave her strength, even when the world around her seemed filled with danger. The valley itself seemed to reflect the feud. The northern hills were dotted with strong fences, well-tended fields, and guarded cattle, while the southern plains had equally sturdy defenses. Tracks and trails crisscrossed the land, evidence of past conflicts and secret movements. Even the animals seemed aware of the tension. Herds would scatter at unexpected noises, horses would neigh in warning, and the wind carried whispers of conflict like ghosts through the trees. Nature itself had adapted to the long-standing hostility, and the humans had adapted alongside it. Despite all this, moments of peace still appeared, brief and fleeting. On rare days, when the wind was calm and the sun painted the hills gold, both families would notice the beauty of the valley and remember what could be. The rancher sometimes allowed himself to admire the fields, the streams, and the sky. The daughter would ride to the highest hill and look at the horizon, feeling a longing for something more. These moments reminded them both that life could be more than feud, but they also reminded them how fragile peace could be. Neighbors watched the feud with concern. They knew the dangers of allowing hatred to fester for years without end. Some tried to intervene, offering advice or assistance, but the long history of mistrust made mediation nearly impossible. Every attempt to reconcile had failed, leaving the valley in a delicate balance of fear and anger. The feud had become part of life, and both families had come to see each other as permanent obstacles rather than human beings with hopes and dreams. Even the younger generation, children who barely remembered a time before the feud, carried its weight. They learned to ride and handle cattle, but they also learned caution, suspicion, and sometimes even anger toward the other side. Stories of past conflicts were told at the dinner table, shaping their understanding of the world. They inherited the history of violence, but also the resilience of those who had survived it. Each day was a lesson in navigating the delicate line between survival and destruction. The rancher's own family felt the strain. His parents had long passed, leaving him to carry the burden of responsibility. His siblings were older, some married into distant towns, but the loyalty to the land and the family name remained. Every decision he made, every movement he executed, was influenced by the fear of further conflict. Yet he was determined not to let the feud define him entirely. He wanted to protect his land, but he also dreamed of a future where the valley could breathe again, where children could play without fear, and where families could live side by side without animosity. The daughter, too, was caught between fear and hope. She respected her father's decisions, but she also recognized that life could be more than defending boundaries and guarding against attacks. She longed for a chance to make a difference, to create a life where peace could exist. She carried the knowledge that courage alone might not be enough, that wisdom, patience, and careful choices could be just as powerful. Her understanding of the feud's history made her a quiet observer, someone who saw the cracks in the conflict and imagined ways they could be repaired. Yet, both families knew that time alone would not end the war. The feud had become more than a series of fights. It had become a part of identity, a symbol of pride, and a force that shaped every day. The valley waited silently, holding its breath for a chance at peace, but knowing that one wrong step could bring everything crashing down again. For the rancher, for the daughter, and for everyone in the valley, survival had become a delicate balance between courage, caution, and the faint hope that perhaps, one day, the feud could end. After 15 years of anger, attacks, and mistrust, the rancher finally realized that brute force alone could never bring an end to the feud. No matter how carefully he guarded his cattle, how skillfully he rode through the hills, or how bravely he defended his land, the cycle of violence continued. The valley would never be peaceful as long as the two families remained enemies. Every day he watched the land he loved, and every day he saw the toll the feud had taken, not just on himself, but on his family, his neighbors, and even the children who had grown up amid hatred. He knew something drastic had to happen. For weeks, the rancher thought, walked, and even sat alone on the highest hill, letting the wind blow across his face as he looked toward the rival family's plains. He thought about every failed truce, every small compromise that had turned into a fight, and every time blood had been shed over a misunderstanding. He thought about the stories of the past, of men being hurt, cattle lost, and promises broken. And slowly, a plan began to form, a plan that was bold, dangerous, and unheard of. He realized that the only way to bring lasting peace might be to create a personal bond between the two families. He thought of alliances, negotiations, and partnerships, but none had worked. Then he considered marriage, a union that would join the two families together, a permanent symbol of peace. But it was not just any marriage. It would have to be with the daughter of his greatest rival. He knew how shocking this idea would be. People would call it reckless. His own friends might doubt his judgment. The rival family could laugh at him, or worse, reject him with anger. Yet he believed in the power of this plan. He understood that the risks were high, but the reward, the chance to end 15 years of fighting, was worth it. The daughter, meanwhile, lived her life in the careful balance of her family's expectations and the constant awareness of danger. She had grown strong and intelligent, learning early how to read the intentions of everyone around her. She could tell when someone was lying, when someone was angry, and when someone had fear hidden beneath courage. She had heard of every attack on the rancher, every ambush, and every attempt at negotiation. She knew the valley better than most adults, and she understood the full weight of the feud. She had dreams of peace, of a life not dominated by hatred, but she also carried the wisdom that one wrong step could cost lives. When the rancher first approached the idea of marriage, he did not rush. He sent a trusted messenger to speak with her family. He did not demand or threaten. Instead, he carefully explained his thoughts, his hope that this union could bring an end to years of bloodshed, and his willingness to protect both families. His words were measured, deliberate, and honest. He did not speak of love, not yet. He spoke of peace, trust, and survival. He offered a chance to build something that could last longer than anger, longer than grudges, longer than the scars on the valley. The rival family was stunned. They had never imagined such a proposal. For years they had viewed the rancher as the enemy, a man whose pride and strength had caused pain and fear. To hear him now speak of unity was strange, almost unbelievable. Questions arose quickly. Could he be trusted? Was this a trick? Was he desperate? Could he protect their daughter? And what would it mean for their honor, their pride, and their safety? Each question weighed heavily on them, and yet the idea of ending 15 years of war was tempting. It offered a chance for safety, stability, and a future where children could play without fear. The daughter listened quietly as the matter was discussed in her home. She understood the danger, yes, but she also understood the opportunity. She saw in the rancher not just a rival, but a man shaped by the same land, the same struggles, and the same love for life that she felt. She recognized his intelligence, his courage, and his willingness to take a bold step to change the valley. And slowly, she considered that this union might be the only way to make the valley safe, to protect her family, and to end the cycle of violence that had shaped her life. Her thoughts were filled with both hope and hesitation. Marriage was a serious commitment, not just of the heart, but of responsibility. It was more than simply agreeing to live together. It would mean trust, cooperation, and courage, qualities that both sides would have to develop over time. She knew she could not make the decision lightly, and she also knew that rejecting it outright could provoke anger, suspicion, or even retaliation. She weighed every possibility carefully, thinking about how her choice would affect not just herself, but her family, the rancher, and the entire valley. Finally, after long discussions with her parents, she agreed to the marriage. It was a careful decision, measured and thoughtful. She understood the risks, but she also understood the potential reward, a chance to end the feud and create a life where people could live without fear. Her agreement was met with cautious optimism by both families. Preparations began, and the valley buzzed with rumors, curiosity, and a mix of hope and doubt. Neighbors wondered if the bold plan could truly succeed, if two people could bridge 15 years of hatred, and if peace could finally find a home in the valley. The wedding itself was a delicate affair. It was not a celebration of love alone. It was a symbol of reconciliation, of courage, and of hope. Both families attended with a mixture of tension and anticipation. Guests watched carefully, expecting conflict, but instead they saw a careful ceremony, measured words, and a silent promise that something new was beginning. The bride, strong and poised, walked with dignity, aware of the weight of her decision and the future she was creating. The rancher stood tall, aware that he was not just committing to a marriage, but to an entirely new way of life. Even in the quiet moments, both of them felt the tension. They had grown up knowing each other as enemies, and now they were stepping into a life together. Trust would not come easily. Old habits, old memories, and old fears would need to be confronted. Yet, there was also a sense of possibility, a feeling that this marriage could indeed be the beginning of something greater than either had imagined. The valley, once filled with the sounds of anger and fear, seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. After the ceremony, life slowly began to adjust. Both families remained cautious, observing every action, every word, and every decision. The rancher and his new wife learned to navigate their new relationship with care. They shared responsibilities on the ranch, worked together to manage the land, and slowly began to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. Cooperation replaced suspicion, and moments of understanding began to build trust. Though the road ahead was long and challenges were inevitable, the first steps toward peace had been taken. In the evenings, when the valley was quiet and the stars reflected on the streams, both the rancher and his wife would reflect on what had happened. They thought about the years of conflict, the dangers they had faced, and the lives that had been shaped by hate. And they also thought about the future, what it could be if they worked together, trusted one another, and remained committed to ending the feud. Each day became a lesson in patience, courage, and resilience. They learned to value communication, compromise, and understanding, realizing that marriage was not just a bond of love but a partnership in every sense of the word. The neighbors began to notice the change as well. Slowly, the valley began to breathe. Fences no longer marked lines of hostility but boundaries of cooperation. Cattle moved more freely, and the sound of hooves was no longer always a warning. Children played near the edges of both ranches, watching the adults carefully but beginning to sense a shift in the air. The valley was still fragile, still cautious, but it was starting to feel like a place where peace could grow. Through it all, the rancher and his wife understood that the marriage was only the beginning. Trust had to be earned, and peace had to be maintained. They faced challenges, threats, and doubts from those who still clung to anger. Yet, each challenge also became an opportunity to prove that their partnership was stronger than the divisions of the past. Together, they were not just husband and wife. They were symbols of hope, examples of courage, and the living proof that even the deepest rivalries could be transformed into cooperation, respect, and eventually, harmony. Marriage had brought the rancher and his new wife together. But it had not erased the years of mistrust and anger that had defined their families. Even after the wedding, both felt the weight of the past. Every look, every word, and every movement was carefully measured. The valley, which had witnessed decades of hostility, seemed to observe them, waiting to see if this union could survive the realities of daily life. The first weeks were filled with challenges. They lived in the rancher's home, a sturdy building that had been passed down through generations. The walls were thick with history, and the furniture showed the wear of years of work and life. The wife entered a home where every corner, every tool, and every routine reminded her of the man she had once seen as a rival. She noticed the way he moved through the ranch, the way he handled cattle, and the way he spoke with neighbors. She also noticed the quiet moments, how he paused to look at the land, how he sometimes seemed lost in thought, and how he carried the burden of years of conflict. The rancher, in turn, watched his wife carefully. He had proposed marriage as a way to bring peace, but now that it had happened, he realized that true partnership required more than a ceremony. He needed to trust her, rely on her judgment, and respect her abilities. She was not just a symbol of reconciliation. She was a person with thoughts, instincts, and courage that could help him navigate the challenges ahead. Yet trust did not come easily. The memories of past attacks, betrayals, and ambushes were still fresh in his mind. He had learned to rely only on himself and to expect the worst from others. Letting someone into his life completely felt both necessary and terrifying. Their first tasks together on the ranch tested both their patience and their cooperation. Moving the cattle, repairing fences, and managing the pastures required careful planning. The rancher was used to doing everything in his own way, relying on years of experience. His wife, however, brought her own skills and ideas to the work. She had grown up learning how to handle livestock, how to ride in difficult terrain, and how to anticipate problems before they became disasters. At first, there were small disagreements. The rancher would give one instruction, and she would suggest a different approach. Sometimes words were exchanged sharply, reflecting old habits of stubbornness and pride. Yet, as days passed, both began to see the value in cooperation. The wife's suggestions often solved problems faster than the rancher's methods. She had a keen eye for detail, noticing weak spots in fences and the subtle behavior of the cattle that indicated illness or stress. The rancher, in turn, shared his knowledge of the land, teaching her where the best grazing spots were, how to predict the weather from the clouds, and how to anticipate the movements of neighboring herds. Slowly, they began to complement each other. Their combined skills made the ranch stronger than it had been before, and their respect for each other grew with every shared success. But trust was not built solely through work. It was built in quiet moments, in conversations over meals, and in the small gestures of care that marked their new life together. The wife noticed the rancher's exhaustion after long days in the sun, and she learned to bring him food and water at the right times. The rancher noticed how she worried about his safety when riding alone and began to take extra precautions to ensure she felt secure. These small acts, repeated day after day, became the foundation of mutual trust. They were learning, slowly, that partnership was more than sharing work. It was sharing responsibility, respect, and the burdens of life. Evenings were the time when the past felt heaviest. Sitting by the fireplace, both would reflect on the events that had led them here. The rancher thought about the years of conflict, the attacks on his home, and the fear that had never left him. His wife thought about the way her family had prepared her for danger, the nights she had spent listening to the sounds of the valley, and the hope that she could finally create a life where such fear was not constant. In these moments, they began to share their experiences, telling each other stories they had never told anyone else. These conversations were not always easy. Sometimes they brought up anger, sadness, or regret, but they also brought understanding. By sharing their memories and fears, they began to see each other as human beings shaped by similar struggles, rather than as symbols of their family's enmity. The valley itself seemed to respond to their growing cooperation. Where fences had once marked tension, they now became boundaries maintained with shared effort. Cattle moved more smoothly between pastures, and the risk of theft or attack seemed to lessen as both families worked to show that the marriage had changed the dynamic of the valley. Neighbors who had once watched warily from a distance began to notice the shift. Some came to offer help, bringing tools, food, or advice. The couple welcomed these gestures, understanding that building trust extended beyond their home and required the support of the wider community. As trust grew, small acts of bravery and care began to define their relationship. The wife showed courage in situations that could have led to disaster. She learned to ride alone when needed, to move cattle safely through tricky terrain, and to make quick decisions when the unexpected occurred. The rancher, in turn, began to rely on her judgment in ways he had never relied on anyone before. When storms threatened the pastures or predators lurked nearby, he looked to her for advice and action. Each success, each decision that led to safety and prosperity, strengthened the bond between them. At the same time, they both faced doubts and reminders of the past. The rival family still harbored skepticism, watching for signs of betrayal. Old neighbors whispered about whether the feud could truly be ended, and some remained cautious or hostile. These external pressures tested the couple's patience and resilience. They had to navigate not just the work of the ranch, but the perceptions, fears, and judgments of everyone around them. And yet, with each challenge, they found that facing adversity together made them stronger. The couple also learned the importance of patience. Trust could not be rushed. They discovered that small victories, repairing a fence, guiding cattle safely, or resolving a minor dispute, were just as important as grand gestures. Each step built confidence, not just in their skills, but in each other. They learned to listen, to wait, and to consider the other's perspective. They learned that respect was earned through action, not words alone. There were moments of quiet joy amid the hard work. Riding together across the hills, sharing meals, and talking late into the night brought laughter and lightness into their lives. These moments reminded them that life could be more than conflict. They began to imagine a future where children could play safely, where the valley could thrive, and where families could meet without fear. These visions became the motivation for their continued effort. The bond between them deepened not through words alone, but through action. The rancher noticed how she remembered the needs of every animal, how she anticipated dangers before they arose, and how she worked tirelessly for the benefit of everyone. The wife noticed how he carried the weight of responsibility with quiet determination, how he considered every decision carefully, and how he worked to protect not just his own family, but the valley as a whole. These observations led to admiration, respect, and a growing sense of partnership. By the end of the season, it was clear that the couple had begun to transform not just their marriage, but the ranch itself. The land was healthier, the cattle were stronger, and the fences were secure. The valley, once marked by tension and fear, began to feel like a place where cooperation could thrive. People noticed the change, and even those who had doubted the marriage began to see the value of unity over division. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the hills, the rancher and his wife would sit together, often in silence, watching the valley they both loved. They reflected on the journey so far, the challenges they had overcome, and the trust they were building. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. Old wounds would still surface, external threats could arise, and moments of doubt would come. But they also knew that together, they were stronger than either had been alone. Each day of cooperation, each shared success, each moment of understanding made the possibility of lasting peace more real. The valley had begun to change, not because hatred had disappeared, but because two people had chosen to act differently. Their partnership became a living example of how courage, patience, and cooperation could overcome years of enmity. And while trust had not fully replaced fear, the foundations were laid. The rancher and his wife had learned that building trust required daily effort, respect, and the willingness to face challenges together. They had discovered that partnership, more than any ceremony or promise, was the key to transforming their lives and their valley. By the time winter approached, their bond had grown stronger. The wife had earned the rancher's full trust, and he had become her steadfast protector and supporter. Together, they had navigated dangers, learned to rely on each other, and created a rhythm of life that balanced work, care, and understanding. The valley, once divided by anger and suspicion, now held the promise of harmony. And while challenges remained, the foundation for a future built on trust, courage, and mutual respect had been firmly established. Winter had passed, and spring brought new life to the valley. The hills turned green again, streams flowed with fresh water, and the rancher and his wife felt a sense of accomplishment in the work they had done together. Their partnership had grown stronger, and the land seemed to breathe with their cooperation. Yet even as they tended to their ranch and the cattle moved peacefully across the pastures, the valley held its secrets. Dangers, though less frequent than before, still lurked in shadows, and the past was never far behind. One evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a sudden tension filled the air. The rancher had been checking the fences on the northern boundary while his wife moved the cattle toward the south pasture. The wind shifted unexpectedly, carrying sounds that made both of them uneasy. There were whispers from the trees, the distant clatter of hooves that did not belong to their own, and the sense of movement where no one should be. The rancher stopped and listened. His instincts, honed from years of surviving ambushes and attacks, told him that something was wrong. He turned his horse toward the ranch house to warn his wife, but before he could move, a group of men appeared along the ridge. They were not members of either family. They were outsiders, opportunists who had heard of the wealth and resources in the valley and hoped to take advantage of the family's history of conflict. They carried ropes, clubs, and weapons, and their faces were set with determination. The rancher realized immediately that this was a coordinated attack, designed to strike quickly and without warning. The wife, seeing the movement from the pasture, knew at once that danger had arrived. She whistled sharply to alert the cattle, sending them scattering toward safe areas, and then spurred her horse toward the ridge. Her heart pounded, but fear did not slow her. She had learned courage and quick thinking from a lifetime of preparation, and now she needed every skill she had. She knew that the rancher was alone and that he could be outnumbered. The men had no idea that they were facing not just a single man, but a woman who would not allow her family to be harmed. The rancher, sensing that he was outnumbered, moved carefully but quickly. He kept his horse between him and the attackers, trying to buy time while he thought of a strategy. He could see the determination in their eyes, the greed that had brought them here, and he knew that caution alone might not save him. The situation was dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than anything he had faced in the past 15 years. The wife arrived just as the attackers closed in. She rode between the rancher and the men, her presence surprising them. She shouted instructions, directing the ranch hands who had joined her, and took control of the defense. Her quick thinking caused confusion among the attackers, who had expected an easy ambush. She used the terrain to their advantage, guiding her husband and the workers to higher ground where the attackers could not easily follow. Her sharp eyes noted every movement, every potential threat, and she acted with precision and confidence. The attackers, frustrated by her resistance, tried to flank the rancher, but the wife anticipated their moves. She rode swiftly to block their path, shouting warnings and using her horse to create barriers. She remained calm even as the situation grew more dangerous, relying on skill and strategy rather than brute force alone. Her courage inspired the rancher and the ranch hands, who began to fight back with renewed energy. Together, they formed a coordinated defense that confused and slowed the attackers, giving them time to regroup and plan their next move. During the struggle, the rancher found himself in a vulnerable position. One of the attackers managed to push close, forcing him to defend himself with all his strength. Just as the situation became critical, his wife appeared, intercepting the attacker and forcing him back with skill and speed. She had anticipated the danger, moved at the perfect moment, and prevented what could have been a serious injury. The rancher, momentarily stunned by her courage, realized fully that she was not just a partner in marriage but a protector in every sense of the word. The fight continued across the ridge. The wife coordinated the ranch hands, using signals and shouts to move the cattle to safety and prevent the attackers from causing more damage. She moved quickly, her mind calculating the terrain, the numbers of attackers, and the best ways to defend the ranch. The rancher followed her lead, trusting her judgment completely. Together, they formed a strategy that made the attackers hesitate. Each action she took demonstrated her bravery, intelligence, and quick thinking, and it became clear to everyone involved that she was saving not just the rancher's life, but the safety of the entire ranch. As the battle reached its peak, one of the attackers attempted to reach the rancher from behind. The wife saw the move instantly and intervened, placing herself between the two and forcing the attacker to retreat. Her courage and speed saved the rancher from serious harm. The men, seeing the unity and determination of the couple and their helpers, began to lose confidence. They realized that this would not be an easy raid and that the rancher and his wife were capable of defending themselves effectively. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was only a tense moment, the attackers began to retreat. The rancher and his wife pursued them just far enough to ensure that they would not return soon, then turned back to assess the ranch. The cattle were mostly safe, the fences had minor damage, and the workers were unharmed. The rancher, breathing heavily, looked at his wife with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and admiration. He realized fully that she had saved his life, not just through bravery, but through intelligence, preparation, and courage under pressure. That night, as they repaired the fences and settled the cattle, the rancher and his wife spoke quietly. Words were unnecessary to express the bond that had grown stronger in those moments of danger. The rancher had always respected her skills, but now his respect had turned into deep admiration. He understood that the marriage he had arranged to end the feud had also created a true partnership, a partnership in which each person relied on and protected the other. The wife, in turn, recognized the rancher's trust, his willingness to follow her lead when necessary, and his courage to face danger alongside her. They had survived a moment that could have ended in tragedy, and in doing so, their connection had deepened beyond what either had imagined. The attack became a story that spread through the valley quickly. Neighbors who had doubted the marriage, who had whispered about whether peace could last, now saw the strength of the couple's partnership. They witnessed that unity, courage, and trust could overcome danger and protect what was most valuable. The valley, which had once seemed dominated by fear and hostility, began to feel hope. If two people could face such danger and emerge stronger, perhaps peace and cooperation could truly take root. In the following days, the rancher and his wife continued to strengthen the ranch. They repaired the damage from the attack, improved the defenses, and trained the workers in strategies for safety. Each day reinforced their partnership and their ability to face challenges together. The valley slowly changed as well. People noticed the shift, and the idea of reconciliation, trust, and cooperation grew stronger in the hearts of everyone who lived there. The attack had been a test, and the couple had passed it, proving that courage, skill, and unity could overcome even the most dangerous threats. By the time spring gave way to summer, the rancher and his wife had not only defended their land but also solidified their partnership. They had learned the importance of trust, of relying on one another, and of acting decisively when danger arose. They had transformed a marriage arranged for peace into a true bond forged in courage and shared responsibility. The valley, once shadowed by fear and conflict, now felt the promise of stability and safety. The wife's bravery became a legend among the neighbors. Stories of how she had saved the rancher's life, protected the cattle, and coordinated the defense spread quickly. People began to see that her role was not merely symbolic. She was a protector, a strategist, and a force that had changed the course of the ranch's history. The rancher, proud and grateful, made sure that her courage was recognized, understanding that without her quick thinking and fearless action, the outcome could have been very different. The attack left a lasting impression on both families. The rival family, who had once doubted the marriage, now saw the power of unity. The valley's people began to believe that the feud could truly end, not through words alone, but through actions that demonstrated trust, courage, and mutual respect. The marriage, once a tentative step toward peace, had now proven its value in the most dramatic way possible. Even in quiet moments after the attack, the rancher and his wife reflected on what had happened. They knew that threats could arise again, but they also knew that together they were strong. Each had skills, knowledge, and courage that complemented the other. Each had the ability to protect, support, and inspire the other. And most importantly, they had discovered a deep trust that would guide them through any future challenge. The events of the previous months had changed everything. The rancher and his wife had faced danger together, defended their home, and built a bond that went beyond words or duty. What had begun as a marriage arranged to end a long feud had now grown into a partnership founded on trust, courage, and mutual respect. Their relationship had become a living example of how people could rise above old conflicts and work together to create a better future. The valley, which had once been filled with tension, suspicion, and fear, began to breathe again. Neighbors who had long watched the families with caution now began to see a new possibility. That peace could last, that the land could prosper, and that children could grow up without fear. The stories of the wife's bravery during the attack, of how she had saved the rancher's life and protected the cattle, spread quickly. These stories were told not as gossip, but as examples of courage, leadership, and the power of cooperation. The rival family, too, began to recognize the truth of what the marriage had accomplished. They had doubted the arrangement at first, worried that it was a trick, or that the rancher's pride would prevent him from honoring the truce. But after witnessing the events and the ongoing partnership, they understood that real change was possible. Trust, while fragile, could be built. Old grudges, while difficult to forget, could be set aside when people acted with integrity and courage. Over time, the rival family became allies, participating in joint efforts to protect the valley, share resources, and maintain peace. On the ranch itself, life settled into a rhythm of work, care, and collaboration. The couple had developed routines that allowed both to use their strengths to the fullest. The rancher continued to manage the land with his experience, overseeing grazing, fencing, and the safety of the animals. His wife, with her keen observation and strategic thinking, guided the daily operations, helped train the ranch hands, and ensured that the ranch ran efficiently. Their combined efforts made the ranch stronger than it had ever been before. They worked side by side, learning from one another and teaching each other new skills. The cattle thrived under their joint care. Streams were kept clean, pastures rotated properly, and fences strengthened to prevent stray animals or opportunistic intruders. The couple also focused on teaching the younger generation. Children who had once grown up learning fear now learned cooperation, responsibility, and the importance of helping one another. They saw examples of courage and trust in the adults around them, and these lessons shaped the future of the valley. The land itself seemed to respond to the calm and order, becoming healthier, more abundant, and more peaceful. Evenings became a time for reflection and planning. The rancher and his wife often sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. They spoke about the past, the challenges they had faced, and the hopes they held for the future. These conversations were filled with warmth, understanding, and quiet joy. The rancher, who had spent years burdened by the feud, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He realized that he was not just a protector of land or family, but part of a partnership that could achieve more than he had ever imagined. The wife, too, felt a sense of fulfillment. She had stepped into a role that was challenging and uncertain, yet she had proven her strength, intelligence, and courage. She had not only saved lives, but had helped create a lasting peace that would benefit generations to come. She understood the importance of patience, observation, and decisive action, and she used these skills to guide the ranch and support her husband. Together, they were a team, equal in responsibility, respect, and purpose. As the months passed, the valley's transformation became more evident. Where there had once been fear and tension, there was now cooperation and friendship. Neighbors worked together, sharing knowledge, helping with difficult tasks, and supporting each other during times of need. Children played freely near the edges of the ranches, laughing, running, and learning from the adults who had proven that trust and courage could overcome years of conflict. The community began to thrive in ways that had seemed impossible during the years of feud. The couple also focused on building relationships beyond their immediate families. They reached out to other ranchers in the region, sharing their experiences and encouraging others to find peaceful solutions to conflicts. Their story became a symbol of hope, showing that reconciliation was possible even after years of hostility. People admired their courage, wisdom, and determination, and many sought their guidance when dealing with disputes. The rancher and his wife became leaders not only on their land but in the wider community, demonstrating the power of trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. Despite the peace, the couple remained vigilant. They knew that challenges could arise at any time, and they continued to prepare for the unexpected. Training, planning, and careful observation became part of daily life. Yet, unlike before, they faced these challenges together, confident in each other's abilities and judgment. The bond they had built through work, courage, and shared responsibility gave them the strength to face anything. Over time, the couple's story inspired others in the valley. Young people began to learn that courage was not only about fighting, but also about making wise decisions, building trust, and protecting others. Adults saw that cooperation could bring more benefits than conflict. The valley itself became a symbol of what could be achieved when people set aside pride, fear, and anger, and worked together for a common goal. The rancher and his wife also focused on the long-term future. They planned improvements to the land, invested in better resources, and taught the next generation how to manage the ranch sustainably. They shared their knowledge of cattle care, land management, and strategy, ensuring that the lessons they had learned would continue to benefit the valley for years to come. Their vision extended beyond their own lives, thinking of children, neighbors, and future generations who would inherit a safer, stronger, and more peaceful valley. One evening, after a long day of work, the couple sat on the porch, looking across the hills that had once been the scene of endless conflict. The rancher took his wife's hand, feeling gratitude and admiration for all she had done. "I never imagined," he said quietly, "that one marriage could change everything. You saved my life, but you also saved this valley." She smiled, understanding that his words reflected more than admiration. They reflected trust, partnership, and love built through courage and action. The valley, once divided by anger and mistrust, had become a place of possibility. The past, with its feuds, violence, and fear, still lingered in memories, but it no longer controlled the present. Peace had been earned through courage, patience, and wise decisions. The marriage that had begun as a plan to end a feud had become a lasting partnership, a symbol of what could be achieved when people acted with integrity, respect, and determination. As seasons changed, the couple continued to work side by side. Spring brought new life, summer brought abundance, autumn brought harvest, and winter brought reflection. Through it all, they faced challenges together, learned from each other, and strengthened the bonds of trust that had saved their lives and transformed the valley. Their story became a legend, told around fires, in schoolhouses, and across neighboring ranches. A tale of courage, partnership, and the extraordinary power of one decision to change the course of many lives. Years later, people would look back at the valley and remember how the rancher and his wife had brought peace to a land once ruled by fear. They had shown that even long-standing conflict could be resolved with courage, wisdom, and unity. Children would play without fear, families would work together, and neighbors would greet each other with respect and kindness. The valley had been transformed not just by a marriage, but by the choices, bravery, and partnership of two people committed to building a better future. In the end, the rancher and his wife became more than a story of survival. They became a symbol of hope. They proved that even the deepest divisions could be bridged, that courage and trust could overcome fear, and that partnership could create a legacy lasting far beyond the lives of those who built it. Their marriage, born from necessity, had become a story of triumph, shaping the valley, the community, and the generations to come.